Greatest ever celebrity wind-ups at 5 to midnight. And who knows, this man may well figure too. Jeremy Clarkson and his outrageous behaviour. So prepare for offensive language and adult humour from the start and throughout.
He's one of the most controversial people in Britain.
You can't be politically correct when you're doing a job like mine.
Jeremy Clarkson is sometimes unwisely provocative. He's someone who seems to like to provoke. He wants to get a reaction.
I've sparked fury. Well, I've always sparked fury every day.
Jeremy will have a go at anybody who isn't English, really.
Like, his two pet peeves are American cars and electric cars.
And for over 30 years, he's been shocking the nation, sometimes even resorting to violence.
Yeah, I punched him.
Yeah. You're 43 years of age.
And then you hit the editor of a national newspaper.
He's upset the BBC.
I've been suspended on this.
We will not be renewing Jeremy's contract.
Entire countries.
Well, Switzerland is a waste of time.
And even his fellow presenters.
I've said many times before, the man is a knob, but I quite like him.
You hear what he said and you think, my God, did he really say that?
I'm not a PC person.
But most recently, his comments about Meghan Markle became the most complained newspaper article in history.
He dreams of the day, he says, when she is paraded naked through the streets of every town in Britain while the crowds chant shame and throw lumps of excrement at her.
With speculation now surrounding his future, has Clarkson finally gone too far?
Doesn't matter how many times he gets, in hot water because of it, he will keep saying the wrong thing.
I'm just an ordinary bloke.
Or will the king of controversy live to fight another day?
Morning, Jeremy.
For years, Jeremy Clarkson has made a lucrative career out of saying the most outrageous things and seemingly getting away with it. However, at the end of 2022, many felt that his controversial opinions had taken a step too far.
More than 6,000 complaints have been made to IPSO, the Independent Press Standards Organisation, following comments made by Jeremy Clarkson about Meghan Markle in a newspaper column.
In The Sun, Clarkson wrote he dreamed of throwing excrement at the Duchess of Sussex while she was made to parade naked in the streets.
My God, did he really say that?
Jeremy has an ability to offend. He has to take it to the extreme, and he manages to offend huge amounts of people.
So where does his confrontational personality come from? To find out, we need to go back nearly 50 years for the first of Clarkson's controversial moments, to a young boy growing up at school in Derbyshire. 1970s Britain. At Repton, an exclusive private boarding school, one of its students was working on a future career in controversy.
You had all the opportunities going to that posh school, didn't you? That public school. Now, you see, if you're thinking of paying for your son's education, look at Jeremy here.
So did you never want to be anything when you were a little kid?
I quite wanted to be an astronaut or king or a rock star, and none of those things were actually ever going to happen.
Well, my experience of men who went to private schools or public schools is that they don't kind of grow up in a real world way. It's almost like there's so many rules in place and there's such a hierarchy, many of them stay in a kind of sort of permanent state of adolescence. And I think that is very much the case with Jeremy. I throw a fairly well-known Halloween party most years, and I always invite Jeremy. It's fancy dress. I always say, you've got to come in fancy dress. You've got to be fancy dressed. He'll turn up in his normal clothes. I'll say, what have you come as? He says, I've come as Jeremy Clarkson, which frankly isn't good enough.
If anybody was going to blow up the chemistry lab and get away with it, it would be young Clarkson.
Jeremy is the kind of the sort of the big boy, really, who will cause trouble but doesn't mind taking the rap for it.
According to Clarkson, education was far from his mind.
Got into smoking, got into girls, got into music, and then I got lobbed out of school.
Jeremy Clarkson was expelled from his public school, Repton, reputedly for drinking, smoking and making a general nuisance of himself. What would have happened if the headmaster had known that he was going to continue doing that and it was going to turn and transmogrify into the most lucrative and spectacularly successful career? He started young.
He was expelled from school with a C and 2 U's at A-level.
He's always been a rebel. Jeremy merely thinks rules are there to be broken. So I would imagine that the public school was the ideal test for him. Did it hold him back? Not at all.
If you got his DNA and you sort of unstitched it and look at what it spelt, it would just say rule breaker.
Clarkson's poor grades didn't hold him back, a point that he's very fond of making on Twitter every August, on the day of the A-level results. In 2022, his tweet read, "I got a C and 2 U's, and I'm currently holidaying on this boat."
I've never had an ambition ever. I don't think ambitions are a good idea. Because if you have an ambition, you either achieve it, in which case, so what, or you don't, in which case you live a life of misery. So it's best never to have an ambition and just take every day as it comes. I think that's probably the best. And then look where you end up.
So how did Jeremy Clarkson end up becoming the controversial national figure he is today? Well, it all started in 1977 when he discovered driving. In 1977, Jeremy Clarkson was 17, and having been kicked out of school, he considered working in the family business, selling stuffed Paddington bears that his parents were making.
My mum started selling Paddington, still dimly aware that probably wasn't allowed, but there were no laws or rules on it.
But like their son, it seemed Clarkson's parents may not have been fond of playing by the rules.
The problem was that they hadn't had permission from Michael Bond, the creator of Paddington Bear.
So my dad was summoned by Michael Bond's lawyers to London and met Michael Bond in the lift going up to the lawyers' meeting. Michael said, "I really like this bed. It doesn't really matter what happens in the meeting, but I really want you to carry on making it."
They reached a settlement and the Clarkson Paddington Bears became wildly successful. But if Jeremy had plans to become a travelling salesman for the family business, he needed to learn how to drive, which he decided to do in his grandfather's car.
Who does that? Who takes the driving test in a Bentley car? I think that's quite telling of the character.
I can picture Jeremy Clarkson passing his driving test in a combine harvester.
That's Jeremy making a statement. He likes making statements, and the bigger and the more shocking, the better. And the only person nervous on his driving test would have been the instructor.
Jeremy was so confident he'd pass first time that he brought scissors to remove the L plates of the car. However, at first, his confidence was greater than his ability. Jeremy enthusiastically and unashamedly told his fellow Top Gear presenters all about that euphoric feeling after the examiner informed him he'd passed.
When he said, the man, whatever he was, the instructor, examiner, when he said, "Congratulations, Mr. Clarkson, you've passed," what I heard was, "Congratulations, Mr. Clarkson, you are the best driver I've ever seen in my life." And so you can imagine my surprise 36 hours later to find myself in a field surrounded by sheep that were no longer alive and bits of what used to be my mum's Audi.
It's almost compulsory for Jeremy to crash her car straight after he passes his driving test in a Bentley. I mean, what part of that did Mrs. Clarkson miss?
Crashing his mum's car may have made for typically entertaining TV, but passing his driving test clearly fueled his passion for petrol. However, nothing could have prepared Jeremy Clarkson or the world for what happened next. Coming up, Clarkson lands his first job.
He was really loud and opinionated.
And he devises a show that'll take the world by storm.
It's a programme based on deep but passionate loathing.
With Jeremy Clarkson's career now in the balance after his comments about Meghan Markle, we're revealing the moments which have made Clarkson the king of controversy. 1978, Rotherham, South Yorkshire. A young Clarkson had crashed his mum's car shortly after passing his driving test. Now he needed a job. With few qualifications, things didn't look promising until he had a chance encounter with a newspaper journalist who knew his grandfather.
We heard this new guy was starting Monday morning. They brought him in. You had to duck down under the door for him. He was up to about 6'6", accentuated by this bushy hair.
Clarkson's new job was as a rookie reporter on the local newspaper, the Rotherham Advertiser.
He started work, rather stood out for his size. We thought, wow, looked like Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy with all that hair. And pretty striking figure, actually.
And surprise, surprise, from day one, Jeremy was a law unto himself.
It was compulsory to have shirt and tie, but what I specifically remember about Jeremy was the tight blue denim jeans and the brown Cuban heel boots.
Back then it was manual typewriters. There weren't any computers. There wasn't the internet. And when they were all typing, it was like the newsroom was singing. It was a really exciting place to be. You felt like you were the centre of the world.
But Clarkson didn't quite fit in.
He was really loud and opinionated as his time went on there. So that created sometimes arguments, but he had his own strong opinions, like he has subsequently.
Then one day he heard of an opportunity that seemed too good to be true.
One of the kids on a local paper, he turned up one day with a brand new Lancia. We're only about 18. I said, where did you get that from? He said, great gig. Just do a little piece in your local paper about cars. You get a free car every week. And I just thought, well, I can do that.
Clarkson had, however, crashed his mum's car just hours after passing his driving test. So surely no one would give him a job that involved cars.
We always knew that he wanted to move on to the motoring world and writing about cars.
Clarkson shocked everyone by somehow landing himself the job of motoring correspondent at the Shropshire Star. And having been let loose on an unsuspecting public, it wouldn't be long before his views jumped from print to a much wider audience. (1987), and it was at a party that young journalist Jeremy Clarkson would meet a man who would change his life.
It was actually discovered by a friend of mine, John Bentley.
John Bentley was a producer of a relatively unknown BBC motoring show called Top Gear, who were looking for a presenter to give the show a shot in the arm.
Remember when Top Gear started, it was seen as a little niche show. It wasn't like the juggernaut it became, and it was a nerd show.
Bentley was convinced that Clarkson was the man to turn Top Gear's fortunes around.
Plaudits to John, because he saw something in him, and wow, what an incredible talent that he did discover.
You customise a Ford Capri. You do not customise a modern-day Bentley or Rolls-Royce.
As we can see from one of his first appearances on the show in 1988, Clarkson was opinionated from the start.
Now this one, for instance, is seriously lacking in the door department.
At first, he was on his best behaviour. He was prepared to dress and to speak in the manner of BBC presenters of that time.
Coordinated windscreen wipers, very tasty.
One of the few times he followed convention.
He, first of all, sounds ridiculous.
Back in the 80s, if you worked for the BBC, you had to talk a bit like that. We didn't even realise. And Clarkson did as well. Isn't it incredible?
He looks pretty ridiculous.
Finally, it's all topped off with these polished chrome wheels.
So nobody can quite forget this peculiar fellow in this suit with the accent. That's Jeremy Clarkson.
But it wasn't long before Clarkson ditched the suit, the accent, and the sensible reviews for something more shocking. One of his early appearances on Top Gear was shot in the south of France, and in an effort to make the car appear more exciting, Clarkson made one of his first televised controversial comments.
And on top of all that, it's the first Ford that I can remember which looks good enough to snap knicker elastic at 50 paces.
Well, this was absolute catmint to the critics. Did it mean that he was misogynistic? Who's knicker elastic? Would it snap? Was this demeaning to women? Anyway, it was fabulous because everybody was outraged except for the people who loved it. Jeremy Clarkson, absolutely at the forefront of the news. Job done.
I'm wearing an especially scandalous thong today. I suspect whatever car that was, it could probably remove this from me.
And you were driving one car and you said, this is the sort of car that would snap a girl's knicker elastic at 200 yards.
Aha! That was a misquote. I said it would snap knicker elastic at 50 paces and never said girls, which was my big defence with all the big bosses that said I was sexist.
Jeremy was starting to make a name for himself.
Jeremy changed television. He changed the way that it was presented and what you could and couldn't say, or rather what you could say, because he would say everything.
And he wasn't just airing his controversial views on television, he also wrote for several newspapers.
I was the motoring editor of The Sun, and Jeremy asked to write a column on my pages. Back then, when we first met, he had a fine head of hair, and he had a great presence. When he walked into a room, people turned round and looked, which of course Jeremy loved, because he does like to be the centre of attention.
The Jeremy Clarkson we all know today was starting to take shape, but it wasn't all good news for the motoring world. With Jeremy Clarkson as its new presenter, Top Gear on the BBC was starting to attract attention.
He was much braver and bolder about saying, compared to most other broadcasters I've worked with, you know, if he thought something was rubbish, he just said it was utterly rubbish. I had a great time working with him. It was really enjoyable and eye-opening as well, how he got involved with the entire editorial.
But his reviews, both on TV and in print, were beginning to push boundaries and gave Clarkson more power than even he could have thought possible. In 1995, Vauxhall brought out a new model of the Vauxhall Vectra. Clarkson was sent one to review.
The Vauxhall Vectra review on Top Gear is pretty much legendary, to be honest, on television.
As we can see from this early Top Gear clip, an irate Jeremy Clarkson made a fictitious phone call to his producer.
I'm telling you, it's just a box on wheels.
He absolutely slates it and hates it.
He pretended to have little to say about the car and was reluctant to extend his review.
But that'd be the most boring piece of television since the Potter's Wheel.
He was meant to road test it, and the car's there in shot, and he walks up to it. And I mean, you know, you're expecting a full road test.
But instead, Clarkson continued the farce, refusing to properly review the car.
Been a lovely summer, though, hasn't it?
I think the Vauxhall Vectra review was actually a watershed in British TV. It was suddenly saying, look, we're bigger than you. If you don't want to send us any more cars, don't send them. We're going to tell the truth about this car, and it's shite.
Good evening. The much-reduced British car industry has suffered another major blow.
Although many found Jeremy Clarkson's style amusing and refreshingly honest, it seemed his reviews were starting to have direct repercussions on the car manufacturers.
The Vauxhall car plant at Luton in Bedfordshire is to be closed by its parent company, General Motors.
There was about 2,500 jobs at Luton that were hanging on it. You know, this was a crucially important car for Vauxhall.
When Jeremy came along, if you put your car in Top Gear, you were taking a risk. If your car wasn't very good or didn't tick enough boxes, the consequences could be colossal.
With the Vectra panned by reviewers and on the way out, General Motors had promised a new model, codename Epsilon in the company. That will now go to Germany alone.
Manufacturers did ring me in a desperate state. You've got to do something about this. What can you do about it? You can't do this. My reply, sadly, was rather simple to them. Nothing. Jeremy is hired because he's the most contentious motoring writer in the country. You know, he writes what he thinks.
I believe, though, some car companies don't like you because you've slagged them off.
Some?
Yeah. I mean, why do you do that?
Why do I say that cars are rubbish?
Yeah.
Well, it would be very easy, I know, to go on and say they're all absolutely lovely except for the shape of the ashtray, but I mean, I think the car's the second most expensive thing that someone buys. You've got to tell it how it is.
Clarkson's reputation as an outspoken presenter was spreading, but his career seemed to come to an abrupt halt when the BBC decided to put an end to Top Gear. So Clarkson embarked on a series of smaller TV programmes that would see him start to build on the two characteristics he knew got him attention: conflict and outrage. 2001. While the rest of us were surviving the new millennium, Jeremy Clarkson was looking for a new garden ornament. In this clip, Jeremy Clarkson used his now infamous dry wit to mock up a Yellow Pages advert for an innovative new TV show.
Oh, you do? Could you put one aside for me?
He's decided he wants to buy himself an old aircraft, and he asks for, I think it's a Lightning.
It's a 60s plane, and at one stage it was sort of the mainstay of the Royal Air Force.
The ornament that Jeremy had ordered was an English electric Lightning fighter jet, a supersonic interceptor used during the Cold War.
The fact that we're talking about Jeremy putting a jet fighter plane in his garden is pretty much as ludicrous as it comes, isn't it?
This would be one of Jeremy Clarkson's first stunts. From the beginning, he was being as shocking as possible to get a reaction from those around him.
It was just like a little schoolboy. Oh, look what I've got. I've got a Lightning.
Then he wants it in a specific part of the lawn.
Jeremy's plan soon began to unravel.
The biggest problem came as we towed it up the lawn.
I don't know the weight of an RAF Lightning, Tornado, jet, whatever. Clearly, neither does Jeremy Clarkson. But I'll tell you this, you don't want to move one on a lawn that's quite wet, and it's had a lot of rain recently, because that front wheel is just going to dig in, dig in, dig in. They have effectively done an irrigation trench to get it where they want the plane to be.
Now for the tricky bit. Hello, dear. They had to tow it up the drive.
And then Mrs. Clarkson comes out, and let's just say she's not hugely impressed.
And you complain about the moles?
The star of the jet fighter moment was Mrs. Clarkson, without any doubt at all.
It's a bloody mess of our lawn, that's what it is.
You knew what I was like when you married me. You knew I was going to do this.
It wasn't just his wife who was unimpressed to find a jet fighter in the garden. The local council also made inquiries. Jeremy Clarkson defended himself in a typically brash manner.
He tells the council this is not a fighter jet, this is a giant leaf blower.
I suspect you could use a jet as a leaf blower. So he wasn't necessarily lying, but clearly that wasn't what it was designed for.
Clarkson's fighter jet was removed, but what he failed to say was that the whole performance was just a stunt for a new TV series, Speed. The Clarkson brand and profile was taking shape, and a couple of years before Speed, the nation's biggest broadcaster had made another irresistible offer, his own chat show, Clarkson. It was an outlet for him to freely express his views, as he did in this 1999 clip when he read out one of his early complaint letters to Terry Wogan.
Only this week, in a press release which has been quoted in a lot of newspapers, that Jeremy Clarkson is a patronising, self-important, snide, two-faced, self-hating, arrogant waste of an NUJ card, if he has one.
It's hard to criticise that, isn't it?
The show helped Clarkson cement his controversial credentials. Then Clarkson had a big idea that would get him into the heart of the BBC, this time with real power. In 2002, Clarkson teamed up with Andy Willman, an old school friend who also happened to be an ex-Top Gear presenter. Together, they attempted to convince the BBC that between the two of them, they could revive Top Gear.
Jeremy Clarkson had a much bigger vision. He said, give me Top Gear, give it to me and Andy Willman, my mate and colleague, and we will supersize it, we'll turbocharge it, we'll make this programme something, an event, unmissable, a really big deal.
Despite the fact that the BBC had already taken Top Gear off the air and that Clarkson was proving himself to be a highly controversial figure, the corporation agreed. Clarkson was allowed to fulfil his editorial vision of a new, reimagined Top Gear.
Of course, Top Gear was a BBC show, but really what made it the show it was the people on it.
I like that one.
That's disgusting, it's red.
Jeremy brought on Richard Hammond, and I believe this was Jeremy's choice.
So the reboot started, it was Jeremy, he'd got Richard Hammond with him.
And he obviously knew Hammond, and he knew the dynamics and how he could bounce off him as another presenter.
And then James May joined a couple of months later, and what an addition, and that was it. That was what they needed, the three amigos. perfection.
So do you really get on in real life?
No.
Is that why you're standing so far away from me?
Yes. It's a programme based on deep but passionate loathing.
And mutual. It's really the only thing we share, an absolute hatred for one another.
Yeah.
That's
We have had this discussion before where we thought, are there things that we agree on? And we came up with sandwich spread, the BMW 135i, and the fact that we all hate each other. Those are the three things on which we were united.
It was that very special chemistry between Jeremy and Richard and the other bloke, James. I remember once I got him to try and admit that he loved them.
I want you to admit that you love the other two and that you would miss them terribly if anything happened to either of them. There's a man love there.
And he was very reluctant to do so, but there clearly is that love, and it's the kind of love, I suppose, that I suspect he went to a public school. It's the kind of thing where they were never, never allowed to admit to having emotions for anyone.
You've got to look at those boys and you've got to know, I miss them and I want to kiss them and hug them and smell their hair. And I want to dance with them under the moon barefoot.
Any feelings whatsoever were beaten out of them, I believe, by the age of about 7. But obviously there's still some residual under the surface.
As well as a crack presenting team, Jeremy Clarkson and Andy Willman decided to build a studio at Dunsfold Aerodrome in Surrey. They laid out a test track on the old runway and also introduced a new character. A man who would become the mainstay of Top Gear and a public figure, even though he never showed his face. He witnessed Jeremy Clarkson firsthand from behind the mask.
Hello, my name's Perry McCarthy. I was the original Stig on Top Gear.
The Stig was a yardstick. It was the common way of testing any car.
How good was the Stig? The idea of the track being the same.
It was about the racetrack and the different studio. And just this sense that Clarkson now owned it and he was doing it himself. And he gave more of himself to it. And that's why it worked so well.
Many were surprised that the BBC appeared to have given Clarkson so much control over such a high-profile series. But the show's ratings steadily climbed. This gave him a licence to be even more controversial. He appeared to challenge the rules around drinking and driving.
May pulls out a cool box with a bottle of gin and offers a gin and tonic.
And he's voted worst dressed man.
He looks like a walking charity shop.
Despite a growing reputation as a controversial presenter, in 2002, Jeremy Clarkson and his friend Andy Willman had persuaded the BBC to give them control of Top Gear. Clarkson now had a licence to heavily influence the direction of the show, with increasing disregard for whatever anybody else thought. And part of his plan for Top Gear was to shock the nation with ambitious and controversial stunts. One of the first of these stunts took place during a 2003 episode of Top Gear. Jeremy started by enthusiastically explaining that the vehicle they were using hadn't been tampered with.
We haven't made any mechanical alterations to the car at all.
So it's not really a review of a new Toyota. I mean, it's certainly not a new Toyota. It's a really old one.
They set out to destroy the Toyota Hilux, and they did it with a massive budget.
They took this pickup, and how the hell it survived everything that it did.
And they're going to smash it up and put it on a causeway at the 7 Bore.
The car came off the tethers and ended up drowning for hours. They didn't know if they were going to get it back.
It had come out of the sea, it had been tied down by lifeboat men and women. I mean, it was incredible. And it was almost like a Disney movie.
I think they swung a sort of wrecking ball into it. They did everything to it. And they set it on fire.
Suddenly, it was resurrected. It came alive again.
To the amazement of Jeremy and the team, the Toyota was still drivable.
It comes in, and if you look carefully, the man who's driving it, the windscreen's gone. The windscreen, so he's having to drive it by leaning out, because that's the only way he can get it on the side. We were whooping, me and my two boys were whooping with Lee. The car lives! The car lives! I think that was one of the greatest stunts they ever did.
The reaction of the audience was amazing. The era of the eye-catching and unrestrained Top Gear stunt had arrived.
I remember watching it at the time thinking, this is not a review show of new cars anymore. This is something completely different.
It's insane, isn't it? What kind of programme does that? Top Gear.
Jeremy Clarkson had hit on a winning formula. Over-the-top, ridiculous and reckless stunts would be key to making Top Gear a huge success. But at the same time as Top Gear was taking off, Clarkson's enthusiasm for shocking the audience was beginning to take hold. With a high level of creative freedom, Clarkson was heading out of control. The Top Gear Polar Special pitted Jeremy Clarkson and James May in a 4x4 against Richard Hammond with a dog team in a thrilling race across the frozen Arctic Ocean to the magnetic North Pole.
Apart from the crew car, presumably, there is not another car within God knows how many miles on the frozen wastes. They're a bunch of upper fifth formers just having a laugh. It's like they've stolen the headmaster's car and they've decided they're going to trash it in the woods or something like this. They're racing across the frozen masses.
But in a moment that would shock a nation, James May surprises driver Jeremy Clarkson with a drink normally made in a bar, not a car.
What we're really making nice is a gin and tonic. Would you like? What? Gin and tonic? Yes, I'd like a gin and tonic. Can't have a gin and tonic because we're in the Arctic Ocean.
On me.
You've got gin!
May pulls out a cool box with a bottle of gin and offers a gin and tonic.
In the clip, James May appears to pour gin and tonics for himself and Jeremy Clarkson.
Now this is Arctic exploration.
Even though Clarkson was driving at the time, the viewer is led to assume he's drinking alcohol at the wheel.
Please do not write to us about drinking and driving because I'm not driving, I'm sailing.
Despite Clarkson's pleas for viewers not to write in, the BBC received complaints. The show's producers defended the footage, saying the item was filmed in an uninhabitable area of the North Pole, in international waters, and they weren't shown to be drunk or not in control of the car.
I mean, they're technically on the sea, and what are they going to bump into? The polar bear?
You know the 49% are going to go completely berserk, as indeed they did. And he absolutely loves it, because let's be honest, most people thought it was great.
Even though many people enjoyed the show, the BBC Trust agreed with a complaint that there had been a misuse of alcohol. However, Clarkson wasn't punished for his actions, nor did he apologise for his behaviour. In the name of entertainment, it was quickly brushed aside. Whilst Jeremy Clarkson had firmly established his provocative presenting style, it seemed he was less interested in developing his fashion style. He regularly featured on top 10 lists of the worst-dressed men in Britain. It was yet another example of his love of nonconformity.
I've been on best-dressed and worst-dressed lists, often in the same year. So I feel his pain.
His personality is so massive. I don't think you take too much notice of what he's wearing to a certain degree, unless you're Trini and Susanna.
They fit, we can go.
Oh, they fit. But you like them?
Yeah, no, they're
Back
fine.
in 2002, in an episode of the TV show What Not to Wear, Trini and Susanna amusingly took on the challenge of sprucing up Jeremy's image. But they had their work cut out for them.
In 2002, Trini and Susanna got their hooks into Jeremy Clarkson.
They kind of were branding him one of the worst dressed men, so he went on their show.
Trini and Susanna tried their best to turn his fashion sense around, but Clarkson was determined to be predictably uncooperative.
Don't need
we all want to see
Yes, we need to see it,
for goodness sake.
Despite Trini and Susanna's best efforts to spruce him up, Clarkson seemed happy to stick with the style he'd created.
He's got this look, if you can call it that, jeans, a little on the bedraggled side, a shirt, usually sort of popping a bit because he's a bit too portly for the buttons to do up, a belt of no particular provenance and a jacket that's shapeless and looks as if it probably should have been donated to a jumble sale long ago. Well, he does that on purpose, it's his trademark.
I don't wear flash clothes for the television. I don't put makeup on. I don't look in a mirror before I do a piece to camera. I'm just an ordinary bloke.
I imagine he probably leaves his house wearing very neatly ironed clothes and very smart looking good. And by the time he's reached his car, somehow, he looks like a walking charity shop.
I like the fact that Jeremy doesn't really care what he looks like. And it's a bit slovenly. Sorry, Jeremy, but you do always look a bit rubbish.
They're clothes that will outlive him. And I like to think that maybe one day those clothes will be given back to the nation.
As Trini and Susanna discovered, Clarkson is not a man who wishes to be told what to wear, or what to do, or what to say, as another BBC show would soon discover. In 2011, public sector workers were on strike. This happened to coincide with Clarkson's appearance on primetime BBC magazine programme The One Show.
When you have Jeremy on your show, as I did, you know he's going to go as far as he can.
As Matt Baker and Alex Jones introduced Jeremy Clarkson onto the show, they apprehensively alluded to the fact that he was likely to say something controversial.
Now, at the end of a day when Britain has seen the biggest strikes in a generation, what we need is someone calm and level-headed.
Yeah, a guest with balanced, uncontroversial opinions who makes great efforts not to offend.
And we've got Jeremy Clarkson.
Put him in a politicised situation like that, he's going to go out of control.
This was a classic BBC moment, and it came out of a sort of crazy thing the BBC was doing at the time, which is to say, if you give any political views, you must balance them. Not saying that to presenters, they were saying it to guests. So you can see backstage, Clarkson has to sign this thing, and he says, what am I signing? And they say, oh, it's just a thing that says you've got to balance your views.
Do you think the strikes have been a good idea?
They're fantastic. Absolutely. Never had. London today has just been empty.
Clarkson decided to do as asked and live on air jovially told Alex and Matt that there were many positive sides to the strike.
Airports, people streaming through with no problems at all.
And then he almost lampoons the BBC by saying, oh, but I've told Annie to balance that.
It soon dawned on the One Show presenters that Jeremy Clarkson's initially calm and measured comments were merely a build-up to a shocking punchline.
We have to balance it, though, don't we? Because this is the BBC.
I thought, oh, no, don't. Whatever happens, Alex, Matt, don't say, yes, you do.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
Frankly, I'd have them all shot. I would take them outside and execute them in front of their families. I mean, how dare they go on strike when they've got these gilt-edged pensions that are going to be guaranteed while the rest of us have to work for a living?
Yeah. Well, on that note of balancing an opinion, of course, those are Jeremy's views.
It made an absolute mockery of whoever it was that was trying to get guests to sign something saying they would always give balanced views. Why on earth was the BBC doing that?
Top Gear presenter Jeremy Clarkson's in trouble again. There have been thousands of complaints to the BBC after his comments about public sector strikers.
For that time of day, what Clarkson said on the One Show really upset a lot of people.
Jeremy Clarkson at Heathrow today on his way to China and implying he'd been quoted out of context.
See what I actually said and then you can judge.
Tonight, the union welcomed Jeremy Clarkson's apology.
Jeremy Clarkson may have apologised for his comments, but once again caused controversy. The more controversial his statements were, the more popular he seemed to become. Except now, Clarkson had moved on to violence.
Yeah, I punched him. Yeah.
And things get messy.
Good one.
Welcome to the event of the summer. It's the Enterprise All-Stars versus the Galactic Renegades. Brought to you by 5 Action.
This is very exciting, Jeff. We've not seen anything like this in generations.
Indeed. Let's take a quick look at the lineup. Standing tall at the back, it's Worf.
Can he cling on to a clean sheet today, Jeff?
Next up in defense is Chekhov, Scott, McCoy, and Sulu.
Some real experience at the back there. Hopefully they can handle any attack.
In midfield, it's Spock, Data, LaForge, and Riker.
All very good at finding space, Jeff.
And fighting it out for the captain's armband are Jean-Luc Picard and James T. Kirk.
Reminds me of a joke, Jeff. How many ears does Captain Kirk have?
3.
A left ear, a right ear, and a final front ear.
I gotta sit down.
Very funny.
Had enough of soccer? Escape into Star Trek season. Coming soon to 5 Action. Some people are on the bridge. They think it's all over. It is now.
Back in 2003, Clarkson had just taken control of Top Gear, and its popularity was soaring, as was his notoriety.
Jeremy makes headlines wherever he goes, and I think sometimes he's not careful about what he says.
In October 2003, Jeremy Clarkson was invited onto the last Concorde flight from the US, where he encountered the then editor of the Daily Mirror, Piers Morgan.
He was the editor of a tabloid newspaper, back when tabloid newspapers were somewhat gloves off in their approach to celebrity, and so lots of things that should have remained private in people's lives were being shared with the newspapers.
Piqued by Morgan's coverage of him in the Mirror, Clarkson tipped a glass of water over him. It was the start of a decade-long feud.
I don't get on with Piers Morgan.
Editor of the Daily Mirror.
Yeah, the editor of the Daily Mirror.
It was the British Press Awards, so the Oscars of the British media in London. Everyone was there, every editor, every top journalist, every top photographer. Jeremy and I had been nominated for the shortlisted for Motoring Journalist of the Year. So we were sitting on the Sun table, and Piers was there as editor of the Mirror.
They're like matter and antimatter, aren't they? They're both very, very big personalities, and when they collide, it's going to go off.
They'd had a couple of stories which had clearly caused a great deal of anguish among the Clarkson family. And Jeremy went off to go to the loo, and I was walking just behind him. And then he bumped into Piers. Jeremy told Piers not to write about his family. He didn't mind being criticised about work or anything else. Piers more or less said, that comes with the territory. They then followed a little session of finger prodding of each other's chests where they were asking, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, I punched him.
Yeah. You're 43 years of age.
I know. Somebody said to me the other day, because it's the first time I've ever hit anybody, ever. And someone said, why? That's amazing. You've got all the way through school, you know, 10 years old in the playground, and then you've saved it all up till you're 43, and then you hit the editor of a national newspaper.
Piers Morgan gave a very animated and dramatic description of his version of the events at a 2015 Oxford Union Society talk.
My exact words, when the third blow crunched into my head, were, is that it? My 3-year-old hits me harder than that.
Suddenly there was a ring round us, and this enormous fat man in a tux with a big cigar going, finish it, outside, finish it. And then I know that the motoring correspondent from The Sun, little bloke, he's can't be more than 4'2", a bald bloke, just arrived in the middle and shouted, I'm warning you, I'm from Newcastle.
That small bloke from Newcastle was Ken Gibson.
I actually just said to them, see how many cameras there are, see how many journalists. You're going to end up on the front pages for all of the wrong reasons. You need to grow up and just go back to your seats now and sit down.
I've bust my finger, look, can you see that?
Oh, yes, so you have.
It's actually you've broken it.
You have.
After about 10 years of feuding, Jeremy Clarkson and Piers Morgan agreed to call a truce.
I've made up with Jeremy Clarkson this summer. It's been a year of settling feuds.
And how did you make up? Did you say sorry, Jeremy?
We went to my local pub and got absolutely wrecked.
That sounds about right, actually.
Clarkson and Morgan might have made up, but that didn't stop Jeremy rubbing other people up the wrong way, including the owners of a classic British car. The three-wheeled Reliant Robin is one of the most successful fiberglass cars of all time, and despite its strange appearance, it's been a stalwart of British popular culture.
So the Reliant Robin, the first thing you think of is Del Boy and Rodney.
And a three-wheel Robin Reliant. You're laughing before you get in it.
The cars may seem comedic to some and nostalgic to others, but some Top Gear viewers were shocked to see Jeremy Clarkson performing stunts in this beloved vehicle.
And he takes to the streets of Sheffield and drives quite quickly, quite inadvisedly.
he does some very funny things with it. I mean, watching the Reliant Robin thing, it reminded me a bit of Mr. Bean.
Now put it in the hands of someone like Clarkson, who is a big built guy anyway, so now it's getting even funnier.
No, not again.
So he's lying on his side and on the ground, so he can't get up.
Clarkson needs help, and before long, he has some celebrity assistance from another controversial figure.
Peter Stringfellow. Oh, nearly. Yes.
The fact that he got celebrities to write it just made brilliant television.
But Jeremy Clarkson had a confession to make. He later admitted to the Sunday Times driving supplement that he'd told the Top Gear team to tamper with the car's underside to make it more likely to roll. However, it turned out Clarkson was actually secretly a big fan of the Reliant Robin, even buying one as a company car. With the new Top Gear going from strength to strength, Clarkson upped the ante to be more outrageous and to upset more people, and he began to turn his attention to foreign countries, especially America.
Jeremy has strong views about Americans. He doesn't have much time for them. And he just blankets everybody the same.
Like, his two pet peeves are American cars and electric cars. And we're an American electric car. So we're in the worst possible situation for someone like Clarkson.
Because you're not a fan of America, are you? Or American culture?
No.
Clarkson doesn't shy away from winding Americans up, including in an infamous Top Gear trip to the state of Alabama that took place in 2007. But it was to go terribly wrong.
So I know sometimes they do things on their show which is deliberately kind of provocative. You know, like when they went to Alabama and they wrote slogans on their cars.
As this clip shows, the trio were tasked with decorating each of their cars in a shocking style that would put each driver in the most danger as they drove through the deeply conservative state.
They paint offensive slogans on the trucks about man love and Hillary Clinton and country and Western music,
which were designed to provoke local people who they knew had a very different view of those people, like Hillary Clinton, for example. You know, they go into what she would describe as deplorable country, saying how much they love her. They're trying to make something happen.
I just thought it's only a matter of time before something happens. And then something did.
The team had to make a petrol stop, and before long, the cars were attracting attention. As can be seen in this clip, what started as a joke was about to have serious repercussions.
Now, are y'all gay looking to see how long it takes to get beat up in a hick town? NASCAR sucks, country and western is rubbish. Guess what? You're in a hick town, man.
We're gonna die now. That's it.
Hell, you're trying to be tears up my pocket.
The good old boys turn up and they don't like it. You know, they start throwing rocks at them.
What's happening?
In the end, Clarkson and his team escaped. But even this didn't stop the presenter from continuing to express controversial statements about other countries.
Here's some of the things you said about other countries. And I've actually weeded out the worst ones, right? I don't even want to start on France, because you've always said
France.
this.
I go on holiday every year in France.
Spain. Don't you think the paella is just rice with a bin bag emptied in it?
Few other presenters could have got away with these comments, but under the guise of his Top Gear character, there were seemingly no limits as to what he could say, and no one stopped him.
They do specialise in giving offence and causing offence, and I think they enjoy the act of offending. And of course, in our society, that's getting more and more problematic, and it's nowhere more problematic than in matters of race and identity.
But in 2014, Clarkson was caught up in a huge row when the Daily Mirror got hold of this copy of the presenter quoting a racist nursery rhyme.
He did the nursery rhyme, eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Watch, because this is how you do it. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
And the really old rendering of that contains the N-word. He sort of mumbled to obscure the word, but in one of the takes, he thinks the word wasn't obscured, and this take then emerged later
Although it wasn't broadcast, it caused enormous controversy. Clarkson begged viewers' forgiveness in an online video, saying he was truly sorry and loathes the N-word. He said he did everything in his power to avoid using it at the time. In the same year, Clarkson was embroiled in an international incident. The Top Gear team were filming a Patagonia special. Jeremy Clarkson and his fellow presenters were driving cars down to the world's southernmost port, Ushuaia in Argentina.
It's like my mum always said, it's all fun and games until someone loses an eye. And that was the case, I think, with the Argentina episode. The background is the Falklands War in 1982, when Britain, under Thatcher, sent its army to retake the Falklands, which had been sort of nationalised by the Argentine dictatorship, and Britain managed to fight them out. So it's so sensitive in Argentina.
So they went over to Argentina, and basically they had a number plate on one of the cars that the Argentinians took as the Falklands War.
Jeremy Clarkson was driving a Porsche with the number plate H982FKL. Jeremy and the Top Gear team denied the number plate was intentionally chosen or added to the car, but the Argentines believed it was a provocative message. H982 was suspected to be a reference to the date of the war, and FKL an abbreviation of the Falklands. The Top Gear episode clearly showed the heightening tensions between the television crew and the Argentines.
Who's that lot in the car park, James? Do you know?
No, I've seen them before, but I'm not sure who they are.
The Top Gear crew were forced to leave the country under cover of darkness.
They basically had to do a massive convoy of all the camera cars, all the team and all the star cars. I think watching it, it kind of was shocking.
Before long, things turned nasty.
And they get what would appear to be in real trouble with Argentinian locals, smashing glass, possibly even blocking the road, the police trying to get them out.
As this clip shows, the Top Gear crew vehicles didn't escape the incident lightly. Clarkson continued to deny any wrongdoing, tweeting, "This was not a jolly jate that went awry. For once, we did nothing wrong." However, reputational damage had been done, as was reported in the news.
This has still pulled the BBC into yet another Top Gear controversy. Of course, sailing close to the edge of acceptability is a huge factor in the programme's success, both here and abroad. The danger in that is that occasionally, over the past few years, the show has gone too far.
Over the years, the BBC uneasily tolerated Clarkson's behaviour. But in the earlier days of Top Gear, another institution decided to honour him. Back in 2005, Clarkson was awarded an honorary doctorate for services to engineering by Oxford Brookes University.
Clarkson is an honorary doctor.
And I suppose by rights that means that if you wanted to be polite, you would call him a doctor. I would not call him a doctor. I would not call him a doctor of anything, apart from maybe a doctor of Chablis, because I know he knows his way around a bottle.
Adrian Arbib is a press photographer who is covering the story for the national papers.
And I think it slightly debased the whole idea of an honorary degree, because fundamentally it was a degree for being controversial.
One group of people saw the doctorate award ceremony as the perfect opportunity to protest against Clarkson's views on the environment.
Rebecca Lush, who's a hardened road protester, she looked really respectable and no one suspected her. Had a coat over her arm, with a newspaper on it.
Oh, good one!
Brooks cares about the environment. Brooks cares about sustainable commuting.
Good one!
Got pied in the face by a road protester, an environmentalist. Got him right in the face.
Delicious. It's kind of banana.
Suddenly, journalists appear from everywhere. Jeremy. Flash, flash, flash. He did the best thing possible and kind of just went with it.
How this works.
He posed for photos.
This way a bit, please. That's it, fine.
Jeremy.
At one point, he actually, tasted a bit of the pie.
Too much sugar.
I don't think you should go around pieing people in the face, you know. I mean, it was quite funny.
Having been rewarded with both a doctorate and extraordinary viewing figures, it seemed Clarkson's licence to shock with impunity was about to step up a gear. And what is it with Clarkson and the cyclist?
We have a difficult relationship because he obviously hates my cycling and I hate his cars.
Now back to Jeremy Clarkson, and this contains offensive racial language.
Jeremy Clarkson is one of the most controversial faces on television. Love him or hate him, you can't ignore him. Back with the Top Gear team in a Burma special, Clarkson turned his attention to fellow presenter Richard Hammond. He decided to warm up Hammond's shower.
They have these amazing inventions, these showers, when you're out camping, whatever it is. You put the water in one of these almost solar bags and that heats the water up and off you go. Well, Jeremy managed to find a little bit of extra space to put a little bit more of his own water in.
In this clip, you can see Clarkson and James May refilling Richard Hammond's shower bucket.
So you can just see the back of Clarkson and May peeing in this tank.
Oh, there's more.
Part 2.
It was a moment that would leave the audience aghast and question whether or not their childish humour had gone too far.
A cut to Hammond later, having a lovely warm shower.
Warm. Sun-warmed, fresh rainwater.
And Clarkson and May just laughing. I think at one point Clarkson said something about, oh, lovely golden rain.
Golden rain. I can taste the goodness. The outdoors.
It's puerile prep school humour. Some of us have never grown out of it. Oh, how we laugh.
But in the same Burma special, Clarkson used a pejorative racial term to refer to an Asian man. In this clip, Hammond and Clarkson are looking at a makeshift bridge they've built when a local man is seen walking towards them.
There's a slope on it.
You're right. It's definitely higher on that side.
The Top Gear team issued a statement apologising and saying they were not aware the word slope was considered by some to be offensive. In the same year as the Burma special, Clarkson sparked controversy with another group of people.
Jeremy doesn't like cyclists. In fact, I think Jeremy probably hates cyclists.
In 2014, a certain well-known cyclist decided to stand up for his fellow two-wheeled friends.
I was in the pub waiting for someone. They were late. I drunk a pint of beer on my own and looked at Twitter. Never do that. And I saw Jeremy saying, look at this twat, he's in my way. And he'd taken a picture of a guy cycling, as he has every right to, on the road in front of Clarkson's car.
Jeremy Clarkson later explained the reason he'd posted a tweet about the cyclist in an interview for Sunday Times Driving with Rod Liddell.
I think cyclists call it taking the lane, preventing me from overtaking. But of course he didn't, because I just went on the other side of the road and they overtook him, and he was absolutely livid.
So I then replied, I should never have done this. He has every right to be there, you muppet. And then it's like a fight in a saloon bar where, you know, the cyclists and the motorists are just all... And Clarkson and I gently withdraw from the situation. I could see neither of us say anything more. We just watch. It went on for about 3 days.
He doesn't like anybody on the road that's not him or his mates, really. He doesn't like caravans, he doesn't like lorries, he doesn't really like any other vehicles. There's a whole wealth of traffic that Jeremy can't stand.
I do understand the irritation that car drivers feel with cyclists and vice versa. So I do get it. So I think he needs to relax about the cyclist.
But then, in a moment that surprised everyone, it turned out that Clarkson was a secret two-wheeler after all. So is he really so rabidly anti-cyclist? Or were his comments merely about being provocative for the sake of it? Then Clarkson admitted much of what he says is known as Google shunting.
It means that when somebody writes a story in a newspaper that you don't much care for, you just think, I'd rather that wasn't sitting at the top of Google.
Yeah, we've all had that.
My name in.
Yeah.
And so I will then go on Twitter, and suddenly the story you don't want sitting there is Google is shunted way down onto page 43.
But sometimes news about Clarkson is so shocking that it simply can't be shunted. By 2015, Jeremy Clarkson had been presenting Top Gear for the last 27 years.
Do you worry that you're going to run out of stunts?
No. Yes, possibly. Who knows? I mean, we'll get very old quite soon. We already are quite old. And we'll get very old and they'll start forgetting things, maybe wetting ourselves.
Top Gear was now one of the biggest shows in the world, with around 350 million viewers. And according to the BBC, that was thanks to Clarkson.
Senior management here credit him with attracting viewers they normally find hard to reach.
I love being involved in a programme that's very successful. It's a very nice feeling.
But a series of incidents and controversies over many years strained the relationship between Clarkson and his bosses at the BBC. By 2015, that relationship appeared to be at breaking point.
There have been all kinds of infringements, all sorts of people offended, all manner of complaints cascading into the BBC, and he'd been warned. This is your final warning. You are on thin ice. Don't do anything else at all to upset the apple cart.
And suddenly, the BBC were on the spot.
Jeremy Clarkson has been a serial offender of BBC guidelines since 2000.
Yes,
so this
he
was,
has.
and part of the success of the whole show was the naughty boy image of Jeremy Clarkson, but was there also an element of bad parenting from BBC management?
The show may have reigned supreme, but Clarkson was now on his final warning. Then, with one single hot-headed act, he would destroy everything. March 4th, 2015. Jeremy Clarkson, James May and Richard Hammond were in Yorkshire. They'd spent the day filming a segment for the 22nd series of Top Gear. When the crew arrived at the hotel late at night, the chef had already gone home.
He was hungry and he wanted his food.
The hotel kitchen was closed and the producer couldn't magically produce a piping hot steak, but he couldn't because the kitchen was closed, and Clarkson punched him.
Hitting the person is just ridiculous. I don't know why he did that. He's lucky he didn't get hit back.
It was in this North Yorkshire hotel the presenter carried out the unprovoked physical attack, so loud it could be heard in other rooms.
I felt a little saddened by that because I could see that it was going to cause problems for him. You can't punch people.
Before long, Jeremy Clarkson called his bosses at the BBC to confess to punching one of Top Gear's producers, Oisin Tayman.
Jeremy himself was the very first. I think it's important to acknowledge that. Jeremy rang up and did say that I've done this and this is not acceptable.
I think he's been involved in a bit of a dust-up, but I don't think it's that serious. But that's really all I want to say.
And were you there when it happened?
No.
And was it over dinner?
Yes.
I've been suspended on this. Yeah, but you can resign.
The BBC suspended Clarkson and left him under investigation pending a final decision.
The BBC is due to reveal its final decision on Jeremy Clarkson's future next week, following an internal investigation. But it seems he's already bracing himself for the worst.
I don't think they had a choice. I think you've got someone who's been the victim of a physical assault by one of your leading stars.
Eventually, the then Director General of the BBC, Tony Hall, decided that enough was enough.
After a 2-week suspension, the BBC announced what had already been reported. Jeremy Clarkson has been dropped from Top Gear.
I've always been a great fan of his work on Top Gear. And I also believe that his voice and voices like his have a place, an important place, on the BBC. But not at any price.
The feeling was that what took place had crossed the line.
They were losing their biggest personality on television, their biggest global brand in Top Gear.
Many fans were not impressed by the decision. Over 1 million people signed a petition to save the presenter, but it was too late. Clarkson issued an apology to the producer and there was a financial settlement between the parties, but it was the end of his long career at the BBC. Coming up, far from hiding under a stone, Jeremy Clarkson responded by jumping broadcasters.
He went for some more dosh, some more exposure, and they went along for the ride.
He took the fundamentals of Top Gear with him and made a fortune. Jeremy Clarkson had repeatedly shocked the nation, but punching his producer was one step too far for the BBC. They sacked him, and Clarkson suddenly found himself without an on-screen job. Millions of Top Gear fans around the world held their breath as they waited to see what Clarkson would do next and what would become of his co-presenters.
Will you stay at Top Gear?
Well, I don't want to talk about that too much, but I think we're very much, the three of us, as a package. It works for very complicated reasons.
In solidarity, James May and Richard Hammond decided to leave the BBC too, and they started to plan their future.
We started in a tiny little office in Marylebone, and there were only 2 chairs in it, so we took it in turns to sit down, and we had a stationery cupboard, and there was a highlighter pen in it and some A4 paper, and that was it. Right. And we had to start. We thought, right.
No one quite knew what they'd do next, but somehow it would have to be as big as Top Gear. After months of speculation, it was announced that Jeremy Clarkson, James May and Richard Hammond would be given their own show on Amazon Prime. It was a huge coup for the streamer.
Names were incredibly difficult.
So what did you reject? Which were the ones you reject? I think I have a few.
3 driving along was my favourite.
Well, I can't see why they passed on that one, but...
Well, I think it was a really good name. It was one of our directors came up with that, because that's what it is.
The Grand Tour launched on the 18th of November 2016. The first show opened with a dramatic and show-stopping scene filmed in the Californian desert.
And I don't think anyone will forget the opening sequence in the desert. I mean, it was just absolutely amazing.
The hero shots of the presenters' cars were cut to a performance of I Can See Clearly Now, played by the Hothouse Flowers, adding to the theatre of the moment and cementing the intention of Clarkson and the team to come back even bigger and better than before.
The opening scene of the Grand Tour was absolutely phenomenal. It was incredible. It was amazing for Amazon. I think it really, their subscription must have gone up for Amazon TV.
But there were some who felt that the new set and the show format was all very familiar.
It is Top Gear with a higher budget. That's what the Grand Tour is. And actually, TGT, there's some play. It feels like it's sort of just a rearrangement of the letters in Top Gear almost.
It doesn't matter what the Grand Tour's called. What we were paying for and what we want to see is those 3 guys together. And it is, you know, it's a special thing.
The Grand Tour, no, that's the dream job.
What shocked everyone was its extraordinary success. It drove up Amazon Prime subscriptions more than any other original Amazon series.
But it is just 3 old men bickering and falling over. I mean, we should have called it Last of the Summer Wine.
The Grand Tour employed the same old tricks Top Gear had used, and that kept people watching.
So Jeremy Clarkson has this very famous hatred of caravans, and I guess caravans are sort of the natural nemesis of the car.
In the past, Clarkson realised that his hatred of the caravan was a rich source of comic potential. He'd regularly ridiculed them, including in 2010 on Top Gear, when Jeremy was once again stuck behind one on the road.
Caravans. Get out of the way! Pull over once in a while, once every 300 miles. Pull over!
Caravans are funny. I mean, let's be honest about it. A caravan is funny. The idea that you're going to have a little kitchen, a couple of beds and a toilet and a fridge, and you're going to tow it on a trailer behind you, that is funny before you even start.
He's always hated them, and they've always been this comedic part of the show.
I don't know why he hates caravans. If you make love in a caravan, it bounces. And at my age and at Jeremy's age, we need all the help we can get.
But in 2021, it seemed caravans themselves had had enough of being constantly ridiculed by Jeremy Clarkson.
There was this marvellous moment on the Grand Tour where it looked as if caravans might finally get their revenge.
While filming in Scotland for the Grand Tour Presents Lockdown, his car's tow bar broke off and he was dramatically nearly overtaken by the caravan he'd been towing.
Speed cameras on it, that's how you know it's not the A9. Oh, no!
The caravan became unhooked or unhinged and hurtled towards Jeremy Clarkson, who afterwards said he thought that his time was up. He thought that he was going to be annihilated by a ricocheting caravan.
Clarkson's caravan lay unceremoniously in a ditch. He later told the Sun newspaper, "God, I'm having the biggest accident of my life."
I think him going either under the wheels of a caravan or pulled off a cliff by a caravan, something like that, there will be a certain poetic justice to that. And I think even on the way down, he will appreciate it and smile.
Despite, or perhaps because of, Clarkson's near-death experiences, the Grand Tour was a huge success. But there was one part of the Top Gear format they couldn't bring with them: the Stig. Instead, they had to recruit a new test driver. Enter racing driver Abby Eaton.
I grew up watching Top Gear, so to be able to actually work with the guys as well is something really special. Jeremy's always got to have like the biggest or the loudest or the fastest of whatever it is. People really need to kind of remember that he is there to, you know, entertain, to shock, to maybe say things and push the bar on certain humour aspects that maybe are a little bit questionable at times. But ultimately he, I think genuinely deep down, doesn't really want to offend people to harm.
But true to form, Clarkson and his fellow presenters didn't tell their new driver anything about their plans. So, back in 2019, when Clarkson challenged Abby to race him on a frozen lake in Sweden, she wasn't prepared for the shape of the track he'd designed.
Jeremy was in the Lamborghini Urus and I was in a Porsche Turbo S, and it was to do some ice driving, but they wouldn't tell me what the circuit was like. So I rocked up on the morning of the shoot. All the lads were laughing and giggling and sniggering, and I was like, okay.
It wasn't long before the design of the racetrack was revealed, surprising Abby and shocking the audience.
There was a massive penis in the ice that I had to basically drive around with Jeremy.
And there's, what shape shall we have the racetrack? We'll have it as a giant penis.
Unusual.
My mother-in-law watched it and just howled with laughter. She's 85.
I thought, oh, we got the spirit of Top Gear back here a little bit.
Jeremy decided his track design had never-ending comedic potential and didn't hold back.
Right, round the bell end.
I think it was the bell end on the top, which actually had a bell. So every time you went past, they'd ding the bell.
Now down the shaft.
I've raced against a few dicks in my time, but never on one. Yeah, a lot of fun.
Poor Abby Eaton, I hope she's not defined by this clip. It's stupid. It's really silly. And she handles it really well. I can't believe I just said that.
At the end of 2019, just before lockdown, Amazon announced Clarkson's new project. One which had the potential to offend a whole new section of society. The scourge of environmentalists and climate change campaigners shocked the world by becoming a farmer. But could he pull it off without upsetting the whole of rural Britain?
I remember just thinking, oh my gosh, he's about to just offend every farmer in the nation. They have been through enough.
All that stuff Jeremy Clarkson said about the environment and all the other stuff he said about global warming over the years. Now he's a farmer.
But Clarkson clearly had no idea what he was about to undertake.
I thought farming was a part-time thing. You know, you just put seeds in the ground, weather happens, food grows, and then you sell it, and then you get a subsidy check and you buy a Range Rover.
How hard can it be?
Ended up calling the farm diddly squat, because that is how much money you make from farming.
You've got to see into his life, his slight cluelessness, which is very endearing.
To everyone's surprise, even though Clarkson didn't have a clue how to farm, he took the role seriously.
It was just so great because you just saw the other side. Virtually everything he touched going wrong.
But it's very funny as well. I mean, mainly it's funny because you're so useless.
Clarkson's farm was one of the first times that Clarkson showed a more vulnerable side, happy to reveal how inexperienced he was at his new profession.
I have absolutely no clue.
What the fuck are you doing up here?
Oh, shit, Bobby. Shit, fuck.
Jeremy is willing to be self-deprecating. He's willing to say that he knows nothing about the subject. He doesn't pretend like he's an expert.
You've got a check shirt and you've got muddy jeans and you've got big boots and you think you're there. You've even got the tan, which we had this time last year, you know, because it was so hot. And I was there and I just couldn't do anything. And then you knew you'd made a mistake and then people came and shouted at me.
But he does get his hands dirty, and he shows, I think, a much softer side. You suddenly realise this guy doesn't phone it in. When he's doing a show, he's properly present.
I'm very much a trainee farmer.
But you're a farm owner?
Yeah, I've got the farm and I work on it every day. I've been on it all day today.
Clarkson as a friendly, positive force on British television was a whole new direction for the previously divisive presenter. The show was a huge success and won plaudits for revealing the true difficulties of being a farmer in the UK.
Clarkson's Farm, you could say, has done more for farming than any other television show in the last 3 decades.
Coming up, Jeremy's elaborate farming methods wreak havoc.
He's got a Lambo as a tractor.
He goes big, he goes much too big.
But in December 2022, after huge success and with a second series about to drop, Clarkson was once again in the spotlight with one single newspaper column. In 2021, Clarkson becoming a farmer was a surprising reinvention, and despite his amusing efforts, he was clearly serious about making a go of it. To his audience, it appeared that a new, more mature Clarkson might have emerged.
It was the first time I've done a TV show ever where we didn't ever have any sense of a script, and people rarely understand what's meant by a script. But this wasn't scripted reality. It was pure reality, and that's rare on TV. Very rare.
Jeremy's approach to farming seemed to be genuinely naive, rather than creating controversy for laughs.
Oh my God, this thing is enormous!
And none more so than when he bought a giant Lamborghini tractor that was so large he struggled to get it down the Oxfordshire country lanes.
Of course, only he would buy a Lamborghini tractor. It is ridiculously expensive. I can't remember how much money. It is vastly bloody expensive. It is huge. I mean, all tractors are big, but this is like a tractor on steroids.
Early on in Clarkson's farm, it was clear that he would tackle the challenges of farming as he did everything in life, without thinking about the consequences. Parking his enormous tractor was classic funny Clarkson, but this time the only victim was himself.
Oh, hello. Wait. Oh, shit.
And here's a guy unable to fit his rather ridiculous Lamborghini tractor into the shed.
But you wonder, don't you, when you watch it, just how much, as usual, is for the telly. It's as bright as a button. So obviously part of it is for the show.
But what's classic, and again, he doesn't it's just the right dialogue he throws in.
Clarkson didn't receive much sympathy from his girlfriend, Lisa Hogan.
It's too big.
It isn't. It isn't. The shed's too enormous.
Or from his land agent and advisor, Charlie Island.
Quite large.
But it is a big tractor.
I think it's a vast tractor.
Yeah, sometimes he goes a bit over the top and perhaps is a little bit of a caricature of himself, but it's telly, you know, and you need that drama, you need those big gold moments.
It was soon clear that making money farming was hard, so Clarkson did what many farmers do, diversified. But he immediately ran into trouble with his local council and villagers as he tried to get permission for a farm shop. As with most of Clarkson's farming escapades, planning a farm shop wasn't going to be simple. As we can see in this clip from the show, a typically frustrated Clarkson was having trouble persuading the locals.
What? I got some bad news from the council. The villagers objected to my farm shop plan for the following reasons.
He has sort of come to loggerheads with the local council, locals, and I think it all kind of stems back to the fact that If he wants to do something, that is what he wants to do, and he will not compromise.
Time and again, Jeremy Clarkson had to face the council. First, he couldn't get permission for his shop, then his cafe. There were numerous complaints about his lack of parking and concerns over traffic chaos.
There had just been, you know, problem after problem with this farm shop.
So he's now got a shop that's out of control. He's got a traffic jam to his farm shop. It's just amazing.
Whilst this may have seemed like Clarkson up to his old tricks again, there was a big difference. This time, it wasn't a stunt.
He goes to battle. He wants various things on his farm. He wants a cafe. He wants a farm shop. Whether you like Jeremy Clarkson or not, you end up rooting for diddly squat farmer Jeremy Clarkson. You want the farm to succeed. I think people see in him a kind of Robin Hood, you know, kind of avenging the little chap's misery by taking it out on the council.
I throw a fairly well-known Halloween party most years. But last year he couldn't come to the party because he was going to come. He said, well, come in, I'm coming. He said, I can't make it. I'm stuck in a parish meeting about some planning permit and I'm not going to get out till at least 9. And I would rather be anywhere on earth rather than here, but I have to be here. So I know how seriously he takes the farm, but I also know that it must be kind of exhausting as well.
What are you going to be saying to local people tonight?
I'm just here to listen, because gossip spreads in villages and they don't know what we're doing. So I thought, well, the best thing I can do is come down and say, this is what we're doing. And then it isn't gossip anymore. So it seems sensible to me.
It's never going to be plain sailing with Jeremy. So it's going to be Chipping Norton Council. It's going to be the residents who don't want the queue to the farm shop. Then it's the planning people at the council.
I'll see you outside. They built a wicker man down there to be a good shot, ladies.
Clarkson may have been battling with the authorities, but his authentic quest to get his farm working had changed the public's perception of him. Jeremy Clarkson was winning the hearts of the nation, so much so that the UK's most popular presenters, Ant and Dec, even felt safe enough to play a prank on him.
Ant and Dec, they pull these brilliant pranks on celebrities, and they decided to do one on Jeremy Clarkson, where they turned up to his farm as protesters.
Clarkson found the crowd protesting about rights for soil.
They lure Clarkson in and try to get a beta response out of him.
And I think Jeremy Clarkson's girlfriend was in on the prank as well, which is brilliant.
As a seasoned prankster, the tables were turned when Ant and Dec played a prank on Clarkson for Ant and Dec's Saturday night takeaway.
Ant and Dec pull off a magnificent stunt. They say they're there on behalf of the earth. They say the earth has feelings and it really is horrible to be nasty to the earth. And they have a whole load of fellow protesters all with their placards and everything else.
I think the slogan was, don't hurt the dirt.
So when you push your cultivator through that, it's crying out in pain.
And one of them actually handcuffs himself to Jeremy's Range Rover.
They get a digger and pour soil all over his car.
And actually, to his credit, he keeps a lid on it pretty well. He doesn't deck anyone, he doesn't punch anyone. He swears a little bit, but then you'd expect that under the circs.
This new, calmer Clarkson, in the face of adversity, was a significant departure from his previous outbursts.
Because he's on Ant and Dec's Saturday night takeaway.
Hi, Jeremy!
And when eventually Ant and Dec revealed themselves, he took it in his stride without losing his temper. It was all going so well. Clarkson, it seemed, was becoming something of a national treasure. But then, suddenly, at the end of 2022, he stunned the world by writing an explosive article in his column in The Sun.
More than 6,000 complaints have been made to IPSO, the Independent Press Standards Organisation, following comments made by Jeremy Clarkson about Meghan Markle in a newspaper column.
For many years, Jeremy Clarkson has been writing a popular column in The Sun. He comments amusingly on current news stories and his views about life.
I always think he writes as he speaks, and not everyone speaks in an interesting way, so it doesn't work for everyone, but that's his style.
But in December 2022, he filed one of his most shocking columns to date, in response to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's polarising series, which had just dropped on Netflix.
He dreams of the day, he says, when she is paraded naked through the streets of every town in Britain while the crowds chant shame and throw lumps of excrement at her.
Sometimes Jeremy Clarkson stops you in your tracks. You read what he's written or you hear what he said and you think, my God, did he really say that?
His comments drew immediate protest across the country, even from his daughter.
One person who very vociferously complained is Jeremy Clarkson's own daughter, Emily. She said she stands against everything my dad wrote about Meghan Markle, and she said she's always been clear when it comes to misogyny, bullying, and the treatment of women by the media.
Doesn't matter how many times he gets, like, you know, in hot water because of it, he will keep saying the wrong thing.
Soon his comments had caught the attention of Parliament.
This morning, more than 40 MPs from different parties wrote this letter to the editor of The Sun, asking her to retract the article and to sanction Jeremy Clarkson.
With outrage building, broadcasters were asked what they planned to do about him.
Jeremy is incredibly confrontational and belligerent. Having said that, I think when he has made a mistake that's a painful one, I think he will apologise and admit that.
Literally in the last few minutes, David, we have finally had a comment from Jeremy Clarkson about this.
One line, he says he is horrified to have caused so much hurt, and he says he will be more careful in future.
In response, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex accused Jeremy Clarkson of writing articles that spread hate rhetoric, dangerous conspiracy theories, and misogyny. In January 2023, a source told Variety that Amazon's Prime Video is likely to part ways with Clarkson beyond the already commissioned series of The Grand Tour and Clarkson's Farm. For decades, he'd got away with causing controversy. He'd been encouraged and indulged by broadcasters, producers, and newspaper editors.
There's nobody alive today who hasn't left a party thinking, oh God, why did I say that? Everybody goes, oh no, I said somebody's frock was terrible or their baby was ugly. We all do that all through our lives. We all make mistakes. And luckily, if you say it to just one person, it's not so bad. It's just that we do it, particularly me, it tends to be in front of millions. And you just go, oh no, I've said that out loud.
He's willing to be bold and brash and get himself in trouble and get himself into all sorts of bother with the press or with, you know, other people in the TV world. He doesn't actually care, and I think that's what makes him unique.
So does this latest shocking episode mean the end for Jeremy Clarkson? As his future hangs in the balance, public opinion, the media and politicians are turning against him. After a career of outrageous statements, stunts and shocks, love him or hate him, has the self-made king of controversy finally gone too far?
12 sets of the biggest muscles are warming up for the UK's Strongest Man 2024 competition. Catch all the action Saturday and Sunday at 2 live on Channel 5. Next, greatest ever celebrity wind-ups.
Experience the early 20th century like never before, brought to life in full colour. Journey through an era of change for the British Empire, with royal coronations and abdications. An age of power and the battles to defend it.
What is our aim? Victory. Victory at all costs.
Step back in time. Britain in colour, Monday at 8 on 5 Select and My